Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my channel. This is our long-suffering 2007 GMC Acadia. I've made a lot of videos on this vehicle. And I think she's kind of getting to the end of her life. 268,000 miles, and now we started running bad, check engine light flashing, misfires. I wasn't going to record any of this originally, and I haven't recorded some because I've kind of been off and on trying to figure out what the problem is with it. Pretty much going to misfire on cylinders 2, 4, and 6, which are the front cylinders. I've replaced spark plugs, moved around coil packs. Can't really pin it to anything, and all the code is 2, 4, 6 misfire. It's also a random misfire. So I've done some troubleshooting, assumed it was a camshaft position sensor, changed those, made no difference. I also discovered that some wiring to the camshaft variable valve timing solenoids was messed up. When I pulled back the wiring harness, realized that half the insulation was gone and they were shorted together, both of them. So I went in there, can't really see it, but I replaced the pigtails on those solenoids. No improvement. And then I started questioning the cheap replacements I put on there, so I replaced it with the original ones. Seemed to make no difference, but as part of that process, I was still getting, it actually got worse, misfires on the front cylinders, every one of them. I did a compression test when it was misfiring, pulled, I believe, this spark plug out, and I was only getting about 90 psi of compression. So I started pulling coil pack wires off, no change sometimes it would change. And plus I was hearing a rattling noise from the front. So my suspicion is one of the VVT solenoids is not working, which is what these wires control. I've purchased a few Dorman VVT solenoids. So we're going to attempt to replace at least one of those. I believe the exhaust camshaft is the problem, which is the one on the front, which seems ironic that it would be the easiest one to get to. I'm going to go ahead and start it up, confirm it's still screwing up, maybe show you the codes. Start it up, it's already misfiring. Those are all our codes. PO202, 204, 206. Powertrain injector circuit, cylinder 2, 4, or 6. So it thinks it's not getting fuel to those cylinders. And I just started it, so it's cold, so it's probably gonna be overfueling a little bit. But those are the faults that keep coming up. I don't know if you can see that. It's probably still heating the O2 sensor in the warm-up phase, but it'll start really shaking here in a second. And when that happens, it won't rev up, and it won't really even get out of its way in traffic. So that's what leads me to believe it's not getting compression on these 3 cylinders, because the valve timing is just, the VVT solenoid is either shorted out and not doing anything, it's stopped up, or it's stuck. And also, I don't know if it'll show up, that sound. See if my microphone will pick it up. It's almost a rattling sound I can't really trace it to. As I recall, these are kind of a bitch to get out. And the access is not great. So I'm going to shut it off before it gets too hot, and I'll try to get that changed, at least on the front cam. So I finally come to the conclusion, I'm pretty sure there's a bad cam phaser on the front bank of cylinders. So in order to access all that, I know from experience the intake manifold needs to come off, the upper and lower. Of course, our favorite motor mount again, power steering pump, to get in there to see what exactly is messed up. So I probably won't show a lot of this, but you pretty much disconnect all the connectors. There's some long bolts that go down through this manifold, so this little blanket needs to come off to access those bolts. And as I recall, that's pretty much a massive pain in the ass because the bolts are like 10 inches long. So I'll bring you back if there are any exciting developments. So I've managed to pull the intake manifold off, the front cam cover off. So my theory is that one of these cam phasers is bad, and that's what's screwing up the timing. So what I've done is I've taken, let's try taking a pair of vice grips. Stupid aluminum hood. Anyway, we're going to take a pair of vice grips, gingerly put it on the end of the cam here where there's no lobe. And apparently if this cam phaser is bad, it'll move back and forth. When there's no oil pressure, it's not running obviously, it'll be locked into the cam. So I don't know if you can see that, but the whole phaser's turning. So my thought was the exhaust cam with phaser was bad. And so I'll lock onto that cam. And again, the same thing, the cam is locked to the phaser. So all I can think of now is that I know these engines, I mean that's a lot of slack in that cam chain, and I know these engines are known for having bad cam chains and tensioners. So I'm gonna go ahead and strip the rest of this stuff off and attempt to replace the cam chains and tensioners. So according to the internet, you need to drop the engine out of the car, take the front cover off, and then you can replace the cam chains. So I need to take some of this stuff out of the way anyway. Some of the stuff has to come off to get it out. So I'll go ahead and take the rear cam cover off, the coils out, some of this crap motor mount out of the way. And I know I can get the front cover off in the car because I've done it before, right after I put this engine in here. So we'll get some of that out of the way and then we'll go from there. So there's a motor mount that goes in this vicinity. I also took out the fuse box, which is actually pretty easy. So the fuse box comes out, the bracket comes out, this whole motor mount assembly comes out. Next up, regardless if you're gonna do stuff in the car, take the engine out, this coolant hose needs to come off. I got this set coolant hose pliers, which these are pretty nice and they're kind of worth it because they ratchet and lock. So what normally happens is you squeeze them and then it slips off, and these lock, plus some of these GM clamps lock themselves open. So now I can take the clamp off. This set is well worth it. It also comes with this little pick that you can, in theory, get underneath this hose and kind of break the bond and then pull it off. And that coolant's going to go everywhere, and there's a pan down there, so maybe some of it will get in there. So next up, I'll try to get the serpentine belt off. As I recall, it's kind of a pain in the butt. I may go ahead and pull the water pump pulley off because I don't think the cover is going to come off with either the water pump on it or the pulley on it in the car. And then we'll get the VVT solenoids out of here, etc. Water neck. Just try to clear some more of this stuff out of here. So this is drip for a few days. I think next, pull this wheel off, go underneath, pull the harmonic balancer off, and I think I can unbolt the power steering pump back there without lowering the engine, so we'll give all that a shot, and then we'll come back up and work on getting this front cover off. I'm not sure if this will show up, but I got the power steering pump snaked out of the way. There's a bolt in the front right here, and one up behind it I was able to reach. I think there might be possibly supposed to be two in it. Anyway, it's only got one now. One in the back anyway. So next we need to get this balancer off. Pretty sure that's a 19 millimeter. See if we can blast that off there. Of course it doesn't fit. Well, maybe. So now we have to get a 3-jaw puller in behind here and pull that off. As I recall, this pulley comes off, balancer I guess, comes off fairly easily. As long as the puller doesn't interfere with anything. So next there's a bunch of 13mm bolts and 10mm bolts, and then the tensioner for the belt needs to come off so the belt can be pulled out. I think the AC compressor can stay, so let me get all those out of there. So the balancer's off. There's a whole ass load of 13mm bolts. There's one bigger bolt there also. I think that's an 18. Don't forget to take the stud out of the alternator in the front, because that stud goes into the timing cover. So anyway, I think all this is ready to come off here. Easily pry it on at once. Nothing's sticking. I think if I missed a bolt, it would have shown up by now. So now that's loose. Now I just need to remember how to fish that out of there. Oh, and there it is. It comes out the top. Not sure how much this is going to show us, but I believe that cam chain tensioner is about as far out as they go. So I'm thinking that's our problem. So next up we're going to tackle replacing these chains in the car. So now we're down to everything torn apart. I believe I have the crankshaft. I put a 19mm socket on the front of the crankshaft. As near as I can tell, there's a dot right there, if you can see that. And then there's a dot right there, and that should be in the stage 1 timing position. So at this point, I also bought a set of these cam tools. I mean, they were pretty cheap. Not necessarily sure they're 100% required, but that puts, if you can see it also, but the rear cam should be, the flat should be up, and this will actually slide on the back of the cams. Again, not sure if that'll show up, but there we go. That's on there, so that'll keep the cams from rotating. Next, this is gonna be hard to show or film live while I'm doing it, but there's a tensioner that can come off back here. This guide rail can come off. The whole chain can come off. We can take this bolt. Actually, no, we'll hold off on that bolt. We need to go ahead and take the guide rail off, tensioner, that rail, and we can take the chain off. Also, the cams, it says intake here, exhaust is up. I don't think you could get that combination if the cams were in the right position along with that lock tool. There's no turning back at this point. This is 10mm. I had already made sure they'd broken that one loose. There's one down here. Oh, Jesus, that's tight. Great, that's either cracked my socket or rounded off. So we'll try a wrench at this point. God dang. A little 1/2-inch drive action got that loosened up. Now we should be able to spin them out. So that's really, doesn't have a bunch of grooves worn in it. Geez, a little loosey sloppy on there. I'd almost suspect that chain will come off there now. Nope. So down under there is the tensioner. And another guide, I'm not sure you're gonna be able to see that. So tensioners right here, 2 bolts, guide pivots, and that tensioner pushes on that chain. So let me get that off there. The tensioner's off, the guide's off. Next the chain will come off. Not a whole lot to that thing. Pile that up together. So next, if I'm not mistaken, we need to turn the engine over and get it into what I believe they call stage 1 timing position, where the lobes on this camshaft are flat, kind of like the ones on the rear I showed you. Seems a little bit crazy with an interference engine, but we're going to take this dot that I have over here on the crank pulley, and I think we need to get it over here. I do have the spark plugs in here, just because I feel like it's one less place to get debris in there. And now look at how far that chain is actually, I don't know if you can see it, but how far that chain is. It's kind of already loosey-goosey on the crank pulley. Oh, she turned a lot that time. Okay, there is the dot. I don't know if you can see that. There's the dot on the block. Let's see where we end up on the top. The lobes here are both straight down, and the N and the X are on the bottom. So we're going to turn this around one more time, and that should get those lobes flat to the top, because neither one of the tools is going to line up that way. Okay, now we're lined up again. That looks a little better. Those lobes are flat to the top. So in theory, this tool should fit on here, which it does. And they put this little tab on there apparently, so you don't leave it in the car and try to start it. Okay, now that should put the N and the X up on top. These would be the factory chain timing marks, which they're not going to line up every time you turn the engine. They're really designed for initial installation. So at this point, I should be able to take this intermediate chain off. And that involves a tensioner right there and a guide rail right there. The internet tells me that's part of the oil pump, and you don't really want to take those bolts out. You want to leave that tensioner on there and maybe just change that plastic shoe on there. So the tensioner and the guide rail came off the intermediate bottom chain. Assuming that's going to come off there. All right, there's that. Those are related components, and they really don't look worn, but the tensioner was pretty far out, so we'll compare the new ones, but that was pretty loosey-goosey too. So next up, there's a tensioner here, and this is what it pushes on. The cam should be in the right position. And then this tensioner, and then there are new intermediate idler sprockets in the kit, so those will come off too. Again, those are 10 millimeters. I think those I determined are 16 millimeters. I'm not sure how much of that we missed, but we're at the front. And that tensioner comes off. That's the rail in the front. This little ramp deal should come out of there. Again, well, that one now has little grooves on both sides, but I don't know what it would look like new. I'm not sure this chain will come out without getting this idler sprocket out of there. I guess it does. So theoretically, these idler sprockets come off and they're a 16 millimeter, and then we can start putting it back together. So that's all off. I think I'll use the remainder of tonight to clean off all the silicone crap gasket material, because there's no gasket on the front, it's all silicone. So I'll spend the night scraping that off. I also got a new water pump gasket because that's rubber and that just presses up against the block right there. She's looking a little sad. I'd hate to go through all this turmoil and have that shit leak oil and cool into the oil, or vice versa. The kit also came with crank pulley gasket, cam phaser actuator gaskets, and those are like hard as a rock. So we'll clean that up. Okay, so I went ahead and cleaned a lot of gasket material off last night. It's probably as good as it's gonna get. Cleaned it off on the front cover. I can wait a little while, obviously. So anyway, I think we're ready to go back together. First order of business, I need to get this crank pulley off here because there's a new one provided in the kit. And then there are the two idler gears, or I guess sprockets, they need to go back on. So I purchased this kit and I already pre-opened a lot of it. It has the ramps, the idlers, and crankshaft gear, so I guess we might as well go ahead and start with that. And the new one, make sure the dot corresponds, which it looks like it does. It should slide on. So that crankshaft sprocket's on there. That was a little bit more of a pain than I thought it would be. I had to take a piece of pipe and a punch and work it on there. Next up, one of the new sprockets comes with a new bolt on the idler sprockets. I'll have to go ahead and get it on. We'll need it for this chain. Pretty sure the torque for those big bolts is 43 foot-pounds. I know they were tight. And that is a 16 millimeter socket. I'm not sure how well this is going to show up. In the front is one of the new chains. In the back, one of the chains I took off. I'm not sure if this will show the degree of stretch. Yeah, it shows a little bit. So that's how much stretch this chain is. It doesn't look like much on camera, but that's a pretty good amount. So if the internet's not lying to me, this will have two black links kind of close together, and they will go on the top sprocket up on the cam. So there's a dot right there. It shows up, and there's the dot, black link running around. There's the other dot right there, and black link, and then that'll run down behind this sprocket, which I guess I should have got the chain behind there first. So pull this off, I'll get the chain behind here, and then we'll figure out that whole lineup. So right there, there's a hole
and that sprocket. And the black link, or the marked link, is right below it. I don't think the shadow is doing me any justice, but that's the black link. That needs to shine through that hole right there. So I have that in the right position right now. If I just pull up on the chain, it'll land on the right tooth. So I'm pretty sure I can make that happen, but in the meantime, there's a chain guide that goes on here. And that's a good thing, is every one of these is like completely different. This is the one. Goes up in front and kind of encapsulates the chain. So let me get that on, and then we'll work on seeing if we can get the bottom link lined up. So that one's encapsulated in there. That wasn't too horribly bad. Next is this tensioning guide, and it's the one with 2 ramps on it, and it did not come with a new bolt, which I find kind of odd. So I need to fish that in there, get that started, and then we'll probably need to go down there and make sure our mark is correct. I guess I could probably do that now, but otherwise we'll have to pull this back off and move this sprocket. Next up goes this tensioner I just matched up when I took off, because they all look a little different. And then that should go in here. I already started the bolts through the gasket. These bolts, a new kit, have a 12mm head for some reason. So this side should be done. This tightened up when I put this tensioner in, took a little bit of slack out of there. Our cam aligners still aligned where they should be. I'll go re-verify my marked. Anyway, if it'll show up, the black link is through the hole. All these bolts are tight. I'll come back and torque everything once I'm done. I'll go ahead and pull this pin. If I can get it out of there. Go ahead and pull this pin, or completely deform it. This pin's out. That should release the spring. All this should be tight. It's getting really hot out here, so we'll reconvene in the morning. Okay, so it's the next day. Try to get the rest of this done today. So down here on the oil pump, that's what this is back here, there's this tensioner little ramp, and the internet tells me these bolts are like specially placed to set the oil pump clearance, so in the new tensioner you just take the plastic piece off the new one and put it on the old metal bracket, then you don't have to disturb these bolts. So I guess first thing we'll start with making sure we can get this off here without destroying it. Then we'll go for taking the one off in the car. So one might think this will just kind of pop off here. There we go. Well, that's one way to break it off. And then the new one should somehow go on here. There we go. Next up, we put the other tensioner on and torque it, or the other idler I should say. Again, 43 foot-pounds.
So I guess it's considered the bottom chain, the primary chain. I confirmed it and lined up the marks. And still don't know how well that's going to show up, but that's how far this one is stretched also.
Let's see, let's just try this. So we'll take one of the black marks and it'll go up here where I can't see on this sprocket, and there should be a mark on that. And then another black mark will line up with our dot down here. And then on the other sprocket over here, I might be able to show you that there's a mark that should line up with there. If that makes sense. So there's a little triangle looking mark on this idler. Put the black link on that one. Run it around this ramp here. And maybe that'll line up with that hole, which I think we're pretty close. Or I guess I should say line up with the dot. So she's wanting to be too loose. So I probably need to go up there and I'll just spin this front cams around just a hair, just so this will drop down to here. Oh shit. And then while we're here, we'll check on this. See where this should be. So this. God damn it.
So apparently with that last drop, my microphone came out of the camera and stopped working. So I need to advance the front camshafts a little bit just to get that black link to drop onto the dot. Next up, we'll go ahead and put this little upper ramp on the main chain, the one on the front, the one that runs between the crank and the idlers. And go ahead and get the bolts put in that. Those are 10mm heads on this one. You can kind of fish it under the chain. If you can see it off to the left there, the black link is on a little triangle on the left sprocket, and the black link on the bottom lines up with the dot on that crank pulley. So next up, this tensioner goes in. The gasket's already installed in it. You kind of have to push the bolts through the gasket to get it to line up right, and then you can go ahead and get that thing pushed in there. And these have larger bolt heads on it. They're 12mm, so I can go ahead and get those buzzed in. And once they're tight, all your marks are right, you can pull the pin out of the tensioner. That should release the spring to push on the chain. And these seem a little bit lazy sometimes, but I guess this one doesn't have a whole lot of slack in the chain. So now you're going to put your ratchet back on the crank pulley, and you can see that black link there on the bottom right there. That we need to move it over to around the 8 o'clock position. So we'll carefully turn the crankshaft with a long ratchet and get that moved over there to that position. I still have the spark plugs in here, so it turns a little bit hard, but that's kind of nice so you don't overshoot. So I'll turn that, and then that'll line up kind of right at the bottom of that white tensioner piece of plastic. It doesn't line up great, but right about there is where it needs to be. Going back up top again, I already got the rear chain on. It was hard to see that anyway. Get that tensioner put in the back. You can go ahead and buzz those bolts down. And I think we're back to where my mic started working again.
So hope my mic wasn't off for too long. So I had to reconfirm all this. I went to check, and it looked like my bottom was off a tooth from the hole. So I was able, I'm sure you can't even really see that, but I was able to get it lined up a lot more the way I like it. And to turn the cam just a hair to get it to drop on. It still has the cam locking plates on it, so it hasn't moved that much. So now we should be able to pull this pin. And then the tensioner should have extended. And the whole lot did it. There it went. All right. Just in case. Okay, I'm happy with that. And let's see up here, triangle in, black chain link, triangle exhaust, black chain link. Go ahead. Pull out the cam tool. So the ship on the front bank has sailed because those marks aren't going to line up anymore. I mean, we could run it around and mark up and line up dots, but the chain link paint, I mean, it's going to take forever to make enough revolutions to get that to line back up. But I feel pretty confident.
So now I get to clean this out and put new seals in it.
Before I get too far ahead of myself, all these little tensioner ramp bolts need to get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. And the ones on the new tensioners are 12s, so I'll have to change sockets, but all these 10mm ones, we can go ahead and torque. While I had this apart, I noticed this gasket for the oil or the water pump that goes to the blocks was kind of disintegrating. So I went ahead and found a kit that had all the gaskets I'm going to need. This rubber water pump gasket looks like it just pushes in here. Can't really tell if it has a top or a bottom or an in or an out. Doesn't look like it. So that should just shove in there. And we hope it'll stay while we're trying to wrestle this thing back into the car. There's also an outer water pump gasket, which we'll probably replace. Came with gaskets we won't need for the tensioners, but there's a crank seal gasket, and it looks like the four for the variable lift solenoid or valve timing solenoids, and those are rock hard. Don't go too far. Let's make sure this fits. It looks like the right size. Got a new toolbox, so at least the bottom, so it's kind of been a challenge to find where half my stuff ended up. Somebody's probably cringing out there right now. These bad boys are rock hard too. The new ones are considerably softer. Not sure how well this will work on these, but here goes. Just pulled the center right out of it. Alright, so let's figure something out for that. Finally. pretty much have to use whatever means you can to get these things in there. They don't give you much room to have anything bigger than the exact size. Finally got those stupid seals installed. Pretty much had to use a punch and just drive them in. So this cover is as clean as I'm willing to make it at this point. So there's no gaskets on this other than this rubber water pump isolator gasket. The rest of it is good old RTV. So I have some Loctite 598. It's black. It should be fine. There's also this groove in this cover to help, I guess, make the gasket. Those of you that don't know, my channel started out pretty much first 400 videos or so, first, I don't know, 30 or so videos were putting an engine in this car, because right when I decided to make a channel, this engine the original engine decided to drop a valve right in our driveway. So this is a junkyard engine, and apparently before they sent it to me, they decided to pull the oil pan off and put it back on. And when they did that, the oil pan sits about right here. It obviously broke that bond to silicone, so it leaked oil like crazy. So I had to, after I got the used engine in, and I think we even took it to Florida and back, it had a pretty substantial oil leak, so I had to pull this front cover off in the car once I figured that out and reseal this whole front cover. So anyway, little trivia for you, those of you new to the channel. So I've been here before, and I am going to apologize now for the quality of those early videos. I like to think that the quality's improved a little bit. Anyway, so we'll get this gooped up, and we're going to let it sit a little bit and let it skin over a little, make it not so slimy, because wrestling this back in the vehicle, especially with wet silicone all over it, is no easy task, and you're going to get this stuff all over you. Just in case, we'll have a little more at the bottom. Alright. There's no easy way, as I recall, of getting this in here without getting RTV all over yourself. I did unbolt this AC line and pull it back just a little bit, so maybe that'll help. I know it sucks whichever way you do it. Alright, believe it or not, that is in position already. I'm a little bit surprised how easy that was. Now, whoa. Now I'll put this big bolt in before I forget that it's even there and cause a massive oil leak. That's in the back, kind of between the cam chains. Then I'll just pick another random one, put it in somewhere else. before I get too crazy, I'll make sure I don't have any wires pinched, and then I'll put all 400 whatever bolts back in this cover. Getting it put back together, have the power steering pump on, damper on. I'm gonna go ahead and work my way up. Got the water pump. It just had a metal gasket in that new kit. I had a slight amount of RTV. I'll get that put back on there. I'm gonna kind of get the belt back on. Just kind of work my way out. And then I've got new valve cover gaskets to go on, so I'll need to scrape off these rails a little bit. Get that part done so I can get the oil drained out of it, put new oil in it, you know. So anyway, keep going. So the serpentine belt's wrapped up, it's on there. Power steering, all that's back on, front cover's on. I'm gonna go ahead and put the water neck on. I just put some grease on these O-rings. That should help it go back in here. So now my thought is I can kind of wrestle this wiring harness back over this way and get the water neck back on, go ahead and get the coolant back in it, and then drain the oil. That way I don't have too many things dripping on me from underneath. So I think what I'll do now, get the harness wrestled to this side, go ahead, drain the engine oil, clean up the valve cover mating surfaces, dump some oil in here down these cam chains, and then get the valve covers back on, get that part buttoned up. Then I can get the harness out of the way and finish everything up on this side and put the coolant back in it. Got the back portion put back together yesterday. Pretty much everything plugged in, coils in, plugs, etc. So now I'm going to work on the front, get this valve cover back on, and then can start dealing with the wiring harness, intake, etc. I did go ahead and get new valve cover gaskets for it. Probably didn't need it, but I can show you how to at least change these grommets on the bolts. They don't really seal anything because they're outside the area of the gasket, and this washer bottoms out so you don't over torque the gasket, but there are new ones in the kit, so I might as well use them. I did splurge and get Felpro gaskets. And that just pretty much presses in. You get it the right direction. Go ahead and stick that in and let it start to take the shape. So these little rubber bushings, you can kind of just prime off here. Say that. There we go. Half the ones on the other valve cover split. And then the new ones that are much more pliable, just kind of shove on. And then they'll kind of just go in the hole and hold themselves. So this may not be entirely necessary, but I did it on the other one. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of oil on this timing chain, sort of pre-lube it a little bit. Just kind of let it dump a little bit on there and let it run down. It'll do something anyway, at least for the initial start. Probably wouldn't hurt to lube these cams a little bit too, since they've been sitting. Theoretically, you shouldn't need any sealer on this. I'm going to put a little bit at these corners where the engine head and the front timing cover come together. And I've cleaned the top surface of the head. Make sure you're not trapping any wire in there, any harnesses or hoses. And that should be all right. And there are several of these bolts that aren't kind of captured. Not really sure why that is. Not sure where they were supposed to go, but that's where they're going today. So going back together, don't forget the stud holds the alternator on to the actual front half of the engine piece we had off. So you gotta put this stud, as I was saying before my camera battery left the building, there's a stud that screws in through the alternator, and it's actually on the front part of the timing cover we had off. So that stud gets screwed in, and it has a 7mm hex on the end of it. You can tighten in there. And then after you spend an eternity getting that stud in there, there's a nut that goes on it. Also, now we can go ahead, put this radiator hose back on. This hose clamp has kept itself in the open position. So theoretically, you can put this back on and it'll snatch itself back into place. Okay, now I can filter this coolant and get it drained back in. Got the radiator filled up. This actually has a radiator cap under here. Got all this stuff back in. Got the miserable power steering reservoir back on. Got it full for now anyway. Now for probably the worst part of this job is putting this intake manifold back on. These 4 bolts go all the way down through. The front ones aren't a problem. The ones in the back, you can't get them in after you get the manifold in. And I've had a miserable time doing this in the past. So the gaskets are set on there. I'm going to attempt the whole vice grip trick. Maybe I can slide it in, holding these bolts up, get it in there and get them under in the same operation. I have no idea if this is going to work. Clearly not. So yeah, that's the problem. Perhaps you can tilt it. Make sure that gasket stayed in there, which I believe it did. So there. Went way better than I expected it. And there's short bolts on the ends. Make sure I didn't capture any wiring harness where it doesn't belong. Go ahead and hook this, I guess it's a flat motor, up back here before I forget. I think this one comes around and attaches to something up here. I think that one. Okay, we should be good. I think these are 13s. They are. Hold your ears, folks. I think I'm getting close to the end here. I think I have just about everything hooked up. Connectors back in the bottom of the fuse box. This should drop in, sort of snap in. Power cable attaches up here. And these bolts just tighten down, they draw the fuse box together. And before I forget, put in 5 quarts of O'Reilly's Finest, hopefully without pouring it all over the place. So I'm gonna check around about 10 more times to make sure there's not some shit I didn't hook up. And then I think we're ready to try to start after I put the positive terminal, tighten that down, and button all that up. So the battery cable had fallen all the way down behind the engine back there. I knew something didn't look right. So that's a pretty important part. That would have been pretty ugly if I had hooked the battery up and that wasn't connected up here, the fuse box where it needed to be. I've double and triple checked everything. Looks like everything's hooked up, connected. I filled the radiator. I'll add some coolant to the expansion tank because I'm sure it's going to suck some in. Added power steering fluid, engine's full. So now's the moment of truth. Airflow meter's hooked up, all this stuff's hooked up. We'll see if our battery's any good and see if it runs or we bend a bunch of valves. Sounded a little rough at first, but I think that was no oil pressure, etc. Belt's a little chattery. Don't see anything pouring out. We're going to get the usual smoke from having everything apart. And so far, we're running on 6 cylinders and no check engine light. So I think I'll shut it off, maybe add some power steering fluid, move some stuff out of the way. I think I'll go ahead and put the inner fender back in, get this wheel on, and we can back it outside for a little longer run time. So there's pretty much the leftover parts. The chain guides really didn't appear to be worn very much. I mean, they were brittle because that one broke. The chains were definitely stretched. All back together, seems to run fine, starts fine. Anyway, it'll live for another few weeks anyway. So I guess the symptoms that led up to this were hard starting, would take a long time to crank to start. Then it developed a misfire on the front bank of cylinders, and or random multiple misfires, and you could be driving along and it would misfire like crazy, rev it up a little bit, clear up. Kind of sounded like hell when it would start sometimes, pretty clattery. Obviously with those chains that stretched. That would do it. There you go. There's how to replace the timing chains in your 2007 GMC Acadia or similar vehicles that share the same platform. I think it's time for one of these. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Wah, wah, wah. So, drove this around locally a few days, not very far. And then we set off to take my daughter to college. 90 miles later, we get there. Dad, something smells. So I'll do a little looking around. Looks like we got a little bit of an oil leak. I guess being on the highway for, you know, hour and a half at, you know, 70 miles an hour or whatever, distributed some oil. I looked around and I don't really see any leaks, at least on the front cover. I thought maybe I missed a bolt or some of the RTV got blown off of it. But yeah, we got pretty much soaked this side of the car. But as I said, I don't see anything pouring out of the covering. So I looked a little closer up here at the front, and it was sort of wet underneath the oil fill. And then I realized how loose this thing is, and that I can just pull it out by hand. And when you put the engine cover on, it has the hole in it that kind of pushes this one direction. But this has a slot and a locking tab, so it should go in. There's a tab in the front of the cam cover there, and it should go in, turn and lock into place, and you shouldn't be able to pull it out. So initially I ordered a new seal. Then the more I investigated it, I went ahead and ordered from this Jungle place the entire assembly, which comes with the seal also, and it's genuine GM. So let's get that put in there. New seal's on there already. Probably not necessary, but we'll decorate, lube it up with a little oil. I'm gonna have to top this off after this also. So the little tabs in the front should push in, tighten itself in and click. That is rock solid, and I cannot pull that out by hand. We gotta lube that a little bit. So before I put this on the ground, I think I'll hose some degreaser on there and maybe get the pressure washer out and get some of this mess out of the way, so I can see if I do have an existing oil leak or that was it. So after some cleaning, got the oil off. I think it should be all right. At least we can tell if we still have an oil leak. I also ordered a whole set of these bumper plastic rivets, because the more and more you have all this stuff apart, the more break and the more you lose. So there's pretty much one left in here. So I'm going to kind of replenish the little plastic rivets that hold the inner fender on while we're here. I didn't really need 100 of them, but this was like 10 bucks. I think like 4 of these at the parts store are like 5, so we'll have plenty more to lose. The hope is we won't be in here too many more times. These have been missing so long, I'm not even really sure where they're all supposed to go. I think that's plenty. So anyway, there's the repair after the repair. Thanks for watching. See you next time.